What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video I want to talk to you guys about a topic that I'm afraid gets glossed over a little bit too much when it comes to setting up a custom water-cooled loop, and that is your fans and how to configure them. Now you may recall from one of my previous videos where I compare air cooling and water cooling that there's not a huge amount of performance to be gained from doing water cooling. In fact, especially with today's modern components, you can achieve pretty good performance just sticking with air. Maybe you can gain an additional 5% or so performance by pushing it on water, but realistically that shouldn't be the main reason that you are setting up a custom loop. The main benefit to investing in custom water cooling, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that in a properly configured loop you can typically achieve maximum performance while maintaining safe to even low operating temperatures at low volumes, meaning that you won't have to listen to loud fans blowing to cool off your components. That being said, if you are not using the proper fans, and more importantly, you are not taking the time to properly configure your fans, as far as I'm concerned, you're missing out on the main benefit of water cooling in the first place. Now every custom loop is going to be configured a little bit differently, so it's not going to make sense for me to try and give you specific instructions on how to set up your particular fan curves. However, I can give you guys some general guidelines to help point you in the right direction to where you should be able to properly set up your own fan curves that are going to best suit your particular situation. Now before we jump into software configuration, let's briefly talk about the fans themselves. Now ideally you're going to be using PWM fans that are static pressure optimized, preferably ones that are able to operate at a low RPM. Fortunately, there's a lot of great options to choose from. Some examples would be the Fractal Venturi, the EK Vardars, Noctua NFF12s, the Corsair ML series, or even their SP series, Noise Blocker. There's a few other ones I'm probably forgetting, but the point is that you should have no problems finding some great fans to go into your custom loop. Now usually the way I like to set my fans up as far as installation goes is that for each matching fan that is on a particular radiator, which is usually between 2 and 4 fans, you're going to want to connect each of those into one splitter or fan hub and create one channel per radiator. Now it's very important that if you plan on connecting all of these fans together into one channel to be controlled as one, you're going to want to make sure that it's the same model fan, which may sound obvious, but I have seen a lot of builds where people mix and match fans, and that sort of messes up your option to control those fans as one channel. Now once you have all the fans installed and connected to the respective splitters, and let's say you've got 2 or 3 channels, you're going to want to go ahead and connect each of those channels to either your fan controller, say for instance like an Aquaro, or go straight into the motherboard, but you're going to want to connect up to the chassis fan headers. I do not recommend hooking any of these fans up to the CPU header, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Now I'm not really going to talk about the fan controllers in this video. You can just assume that if you're using a fan controller like an Aquaro, rather than connecting into the motherboard, the concepts they're still the same. It's just that you're going to have much better control and more options when using something like an Aquaro as opposed to the included interface in the motherboard BIOS. Now one more thing I want to touch on real quick before I get into the fan curves is temperature sensors. This is something I highly recommend including in your custom loop because for one, they're very cheap and they're typically easy to install, but it's going to give you another level of control when it comes to configuring your fan curves, and it's going to make much more sense to adjust your fan RPMs based off of coolant temperature rather than any other component temperature in the loop. And without getting into too much detail, the reason you would want to do that is, unlike air cooling, in a water cooling loop, your fans are not directly cooling the components. You're actually cooling the fluid. So it only makes sense that your fan curves would be based off of coolant temperatures rather than component temperatures, and that is why I don't recommend plugging any of your fan channels into the CPU fan header, because that particular header is going to restrict you to only adjusting your fan curves based off of the CPU temperature. So now we're finally at the point where you've got all your fans installed, they're all connected up to the motherboard, you're in the motherboard BIOS, and you're staring at your fan control screen. Now each motherboard manufacturer is going to have a slightly different interface when it comes to setting up your fan curves. Some are better at it than others, some of them are going to give you guys some more options. However, the general concept is going to be the same. Now setting up your fan curves is going to be a little bit of a trial and error process. And what I mean by that is that you're going to have to change some settings, do some testing, possibly change some settings again, do some testing again, until you sort of find that sweet spot between your fan RPMs and your coolant temperature or component temperatures. So assuming that your goal is to achieve the most quiet operation possible, you're going to want to go into your fan settings and set that to the most silent profile that you possibly can. And certain motherboards are going to restrict the way that your fan curves are set up. They're not going to want things to get too hot, so they're going to kind of force the curve to ramp up over a certain temperature. However, if your loop is properly configured and you have enough radiator space, you should never really be coming close to that unsafe temperature range anyway. Now, after you've set up your fan curves to the most silent profile possible, you're going to want to go ahead and stress test your system and monitor temperatures. Now, if you're able to maintain safe temperatures and your fans don't really have to ramp up at all, as far as I'm concerned, you're finished. There's no reason that you have to try and achieve the lowest possible component temperatures. Even though many loops are capable of running at load, 50, 55C, 60, there's nothing wrong with your component temperatures hitting between 70 and 80C. You're not going to see thermal throttling at that point, and to me it's going to be more important to maintain those low fan RPMs and the quiet operation than it is to try to achieve the lowest possible temperatures. Now, that being said, if you would prefer to see lower temperatures, then go ahead and ramp up your fans a little bit. And again, ramp them up, test it out, do your adjustments, keep testing until you find the optimal range that you're comfortable with. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, and every system's going to be a little bit different, but ultimately, if you're achieving the best possible performance and you have a fairly to almost purely silent system, as far as I'm concerned, it's a win. Now, I know this video is going to seem obvious to some of you guys, but for those of you that are getting into this for the first time, or maybe just had never really thought about your fan configuration, I hope you found this helpful. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I hope to see you in the next video.